Welcome to the 1,000 Nights and One Night. Now, when it was the 653rd night, she resumed, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the misbelievers made off, and the first to fly was Ajib. Thereupon the Moslems gathered together, marveling at this, what had betided the infidels, and fearing the tribesmen of the Jann. But the Marids ceased not from pursuit, till they had driven them away into the hills and wolds. But 50,000 rebels of 200,000 escaped with their lives, and made for their own land, and wounded and sore discomforted. Then the two jinns returned and said to them, O host of the Moslems, your lord King Gharib and his brother Sahim salute you. They are guests of Mura'ash, king of the Jann, and will be with you anon. When Gharib's men heard that he was safe and well, they joyed with exceeding joy, and said to the Marids, Allah gladden you twain with good news, O noble spirits. So Jann and Jann returned to Mura'ash and Gharib, and acquainted them with what had happened. Whereat Gharib, finding the two sitting together, felt heart at ease, and said, Allah abundantly requite you. Then quoth King Mura'ash, O my brother, I am minded to show thee our country, and the city of Japhet, son of Noah, on whom be peace. Quoth Gharib, O king, do what seemeth good to thee. So he called for 3 noble steeds, and mounting he and Gharib and Sahim set out with 1,000 Marids, as they were a piece of mountain cloven lengthwise. They fared on, solacing themselves with the sight of valleys and mountains, till they came to Jarbasha, and the city of Japhet, son of Noah, on whom be peace. When the townsfolk, all great and small, came forth to meet King Mura'ash, and brought them into the city in great state. Then Mura'ash went up to the palace of Japhet, son of Noah, and sat down on the throne of his kingship, which was alabaster, 10 stages high, and latticed with wands of gold, wherefrom hung all manner of colored silks. The people of the city stood before him, and he said to them, O seed of Japheth bin Nu, what did your father and grandfathers worship? They replied, We found them worshipping fire. We followed them example, as thou well knowest. O folk, rejoined Mura'ash, we have been shown that the fire is but one of the creatures of Almighty Allah, creator of all things, and when he knew this, we submitted ourselves to God, the one, the all-powerful maker of night and day, and the sphere revolving always, who comprehendeth no sight, but who comprehendeth all sights, for he is the subtle, the all-wise. So seek ye salvation, and ye shall be saved from the wrath of the Almighty One, and from the fiery doom of the world to come. And they embraced all Islam with heart and tongue. Then Mura'ash took Gharib by the hand, and showed him the palace and its ordinance, and all the marvels that were contained, till they came to the armory wherein were the arms of Japhet, son of Noah. Here Gharib saw a sword hanging to a pin of gold, and asked, O king, who is that? Mura'ash answered, 'Tis the sword of Japheth bin Nu, wherewith he wont to do battle against men and jinn. The sage Jardam forged it, and graved on its back names of might. It is named Al-Mahik, the Annihilator, for that it never descended upon a man that it didn't annihilate him, nor upon a jinni, but it crusheth him, and with one smote therewith a mountain twould overthrow it. When Gharib heard tell of the virtues of the sword, he said, I desire to look at the sword. And Mura'ash said, Do as thou wilt. So Gharib put out his hand, and handing the sword, drew it from its sheath, whereupon it flashed, and death crept on its edge and glittered, and it was 12 spans long and 3 broad. And Gharib wished to become owner of it. And King Mura'ash said, An thou canst smite with it, take it. 'Tis well, Gharib replied, and he took it up, and put it in his hand as a staff, wherewith all who were present, men and jinn, marveled, and said, Well done, O Prince of Knights. Then said Mura'ash, Lay thy hand on this hoard, for which the kings of the earth sigh in vain, and mount, that I may show thee the city. Then they took horse, and rode forth the palace, with men and jinns attending them on foot. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 654th night, she pursued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Gharib and King Mura'ash rode forth to the palace of Japhet, with the men and jinns attending them on foot, they passed through the streets and thoroughfares of the towns, by palaces and deserted mansions, and gilded doorways, till they issued from the gates and entered gardens, full of trees, fruit-bearing, and waters, welling, and birds speaking and celebrating the praises of him to whom belong majesty and eternity. Nor did they cease to solace themselves in the land till nightfall, when they returned to the palace of Japhet, son of Noah, and they brought them the table of food. So they ate, and Gharib turned to the king of the Jann and said to him, O king, I would fain return to my folk and my force, for I know not their plight after me. Replied Mura'ash, By Allah, O my brother, I will not part with thee for a full month, till I have had my fill of thy sight. Now Gharib could not say nay, so he abode with him in the city of Japhet, eating and drinking and making merry, till the month ended, when Mura'ash gave him great store of gems and precious ores, emeralds and balass rubies, diamonds and other jewels, ingots of gold and silver, and likewise ambergris and musk, and brocaded silks, and else of rarities and things of price. Moreover, he clad him and Sahim in silken robes of honor, gold interwoven, and set in Gharib's head a crown jeweled with pearls and diamonds of inestimable price and value. All these treasures he made up into even loads for him, and calling 500 Marids, said to them, Get ye ready to travel on the morrow, that we may bring King Gharib and Sahim back to their own country. And they answered, We hear, and we obey. So they passed the night in the city, purposing to depart on the morrow. But next morning, as they were about to set forth, behold, they espied a great host advancing upon the city, with horses neighing, and kettle drums beating, and trumpets braying, and riders filling the earth, for they numbered 70,010 Marids, flying and diving under a king called Barkan. Now this Barkan was lord of the city of Carnelian, and the castle of gold, and under his rule were 5 hill strongholds, and each 500,000 Marids, and he and his tribe worshipped the fire, not the omnipotent sire. He was a cousin of Mura'ash, the son of his father's brother, and the cause of his coming was that there had been among the subjects of King Mura'ash a misbelieving Marid, who professed all Islam hypocritically, and he stole away from his people and made for the valley of Carnelian, where he went into King Barkan, and kissing the earth before him, wished him abiding glory and prosperity. Then he told of Mura'ash being converted to all Islam, and Barkan said, How came he to tear himself away from his faith? So the rebel told him what had passed, and when Barkan heard it, he snorted and snarked and railed at sun and moon and sparking fire, saying, By the virtue of my faith, I will surely slay my uncle's son and his people in this mortal, nor will I leave one of them alive. Then he cried out to the legion of the jinn, and choosing of them 70,000 Marids, set out and fared on till he came to Jarbasha, the city of Japhet, and encamped before its gates. When Mura'ash saw this, he dispatched a Marid, saying, Go to this host and learn all that he wanteth, and return hither in haste. So the messenger rushed away to Barkan's camp, where the Marids flocked to meet him, and said to him, Who art thou? Replied he, An envoy from King Mura'ash. Whereupon they carried him into Barkan, before whom he prostrated himself, saying, O my lord, my master hath sent me to thee to learn tidings of thee. Quoth Barkan, Return to thy lord, and say to him, This is thy cousin Barkan, who is come to salute thee. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 655th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Marid envoy of Mura'ash was born before Barkan, and said to him, O my lord, my master hath sent me to thee to learn tidings of thee. Barkan replied, Return to thy lord and say to him, This is thy cousin Barkan, who is come to salute thee. So the messenger went back and told Mura'ash, who said to Gharib, Sit thou on thy throne, whilst I go and salute my cousin, and return to thee. Then he mounted and rode to the camp of his uncle's son. Now this was a trick of Barkan, to bring Mura'ash out and seize upon him. And he said to his Marids, whom he had stationed about him, When ye see me, embrace me, lay hold of him, and pinion him. And they replied, To hear is to obey. So when King Mura'ash came up and entered Barkan's pavilion, the owner rose to him and threw his arms around his neck. Whereat the Jann fell upon Mura'ash and pinioned him and chained him. Mura'ash looked at Barkan and said, What manner of thing is this? Quoth Barkan, O dog of the Jann, wilt thou leave the faith of thy fathers and grandfathers and enter a faith thou knowest not? Rejoined Mura'ash, O son of my uncle, indeed, I have found the faith of Abraham, the friend, to be the true faith, and all other than in vain. Asked Barkan, And who told thee of this? And Mura'ash answered, Gharib, king of Iraq, whom I hold in the highest esteem. By the right of fire and light, and in the shade of the heat, cried Barkan, I will assuredly slay both thee and him. And he cast him into a ghoul. Now, when Mura'ash's henchmen saw what had befallen his lord, he fled back to the city, and told the king's legionaries, who cried out and mounted. Quoth Gharib, What is the matter? And they told him all that had passed, whereupon he cried out to Sahim, Saddle me one of the chargers that King Mura'ash gave me. Said Sahim, O my brother, wilt thou do battle with the Jinn? Gharib replied, Yes, I will fight them with the sword of Japhet, son of Noah, seeking help of the Lord of Abraham the friend, on whom be the peace. For he is the Lord of all things, and the sole creator. So Sahim saddled him a sorrel horse of the horses of the Jinn, as he were a castle strong among the castles, and he armed and mounting rode out with the legions of the Jinn, hauberked Capapai. Then Barkan and his host mounting also, and the two hosts drew out in lines facing each other. The first to open the gate of war was Gharib, who drave his steed into the midfield, and barred the enchanted blade, whence issued a glittering light that dazzled the eyes of the Jinn, and struck terror into their hearts. Then he played with the sword till their wits were wildered, and cried out, saying, Aloha Akbar! I am Gharib, king of Iraq. There is no faith, save the faith of Abraham the friend. Now when Barkan heard Gharib's words, he said, This is he who seduced my cousin from his religion. So by the virtue of my faith, I will not sit down on my throat till I have decapitated this Gharib and suppressed his breath of life, and forced my cousin and his people back to their own belief. And whoso balketh me, him I will destroy. Then he mounted an elephant, paper white, as were a tower plastered with gypsum, and goaded him with a spike of steel, which ran deep into his flesh, whereupon the elephant trumpeted, and made for the battle plain, where cut and thrust obtain. And when he drew near Gharib, he cried out to him, saying, O dog of mankind, what made thee come into our land to debauch my cousin and folk, and pervert them from one faith to another faith? Know that this day is the last of thy worldly days. Gharib replied, Avaunt, O vilest of the Jann! Therewith Barkan drew a javelin, and making it quiver in his hand, cast it at Gharib, but it missed him. So he hurled a second javelin at him, and Gharib caught it in mid-air, and after posing it, launched it at the elephant. It smote him on the flank, and came out on the other side, whereupon the beast fell to the earth dead, and Barkan was thrown to the ground, like a great palm tree. Before he could stir, Gharib smote him with the flat of Japhet's blade on the nape of the neck, and he fell upon the earth in a fainting fit. Whereupon the Marids swooped down on him, and surrounding him pinioned his elbows. When Barkan's people saw their king a prisoner, they drove with the others, seeking to rescue him. But Gharib and the Islamist Jinn fell upon them, and gloriously done for Gharib. Indeed, that day he pleased the Lord, who answered prayer and slake his vengeance with the talisman sword. Whomso he smote, he clove him in sunder, and before his soul could depart, he became a heap of ashes in the fire. whilst the two hosts of the Jinn shot at each other with flaming meteors, till the battlefield was wrapped in smoke. And Gharib turned right and left among the Kafirs, who gave way before him till he came to King Barkan's pavilion. Then Khailjan and Kurjan on his either side, and cried out to them, "Loose your lord." So they unbound Mura'ash and broke his fetters. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 656th night, she continued, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that King Gharib cried out to Khailjan and Kurjan, saying, 'Loose your lord.' So they unbound Mura'ash and broke his fetters, and he said to them, 'Bring me my arms and my winged horse.' Now he had 2 flying steeds, one of which he had given to Gharib, and the other he had kept for himself. And this he mounted after he had donned his battle harnesses. Then he and Gharib fell upon the enemy, flying through the air on their winged horses, and the true believing Jinn followed them, shouting, 'Aloha Akbar, God is most great,' till plains and hills and valleys and mountains reworded the cry. The infidels fled before them, and they returned, after having slain more than 30,000 Marids and Satans, to the city of Japhat, where the 2 kings sat down on their couches of estate, and sought Barkan, but found him not. For after capturing him, they were diverted from him by stress of battle, where an Ifrit of his servants made his way to him, and loosing him, carried him to his folk, of whom he found part slain, and the rest in full flight. So he flew up with the king high in the air, and sat him down in the city of Carnelian and castle of gold, where Barkan seated himself on the throne of his kingship. Presently, those of his people who had survived the affair came in to him, and it gave him joy of safety, and he said, 'O folk, where is safety? My army is slain, and they took me prisoner, and have rent in pieces mine honor among the tribes of the Jann.' Quoth he, 'O king, 'tis ever thus, that the kings still affect and are afflicted.' Quoth he, 'There is no help, but I take my wreck and wipe out my shame, else shall I be ever disgraced among the tribes of the Jann.' Then he wrote letters to the governors of his fortresses, who came to him right loyally, and when he reviewed them, he found 320,000 fierce Marids and Satans, who said to him, 'What is thy need?' And he replied, 'Get ye ready to set out in 3 days' time.' Whereto they rejoined, 'Hearkening and obedience.' On this wise it befell King Barkan. But as regards Mura'ash, when he discovered the prisoner's escape, it was grievous to him, and he said, 'Had we set 100 Marids to guard him, he had not fled. But whither shall we go from us?' Then said he to Gharib, 'Know, O my brother, that Barkan is perfidious, and will never rest from wreaking blood revenge on us, but will assuredly assemble his legions in return to attack us. Wherefore I am minded to forestall him, and follow the trail of his defeat, whilst he is yet weakened thereby.' Replied Gharib, 'This is the right rede, and will best serve our need.' And Mura'ash said, 'O my brother, let the Marids bear thee back to thine own country, and leave me to fight the battles of the faith against the infidels, that I may lighten my sin load.' But Gharib rejoined, 'By the virtue of the Clement, the Bountiful, the Veiler, I will not go hence till I do to death all the misbelieving Jinn.' And Allah hastened their souls to the fire and dwelling place dire, and none shall be saved but those who worship Allah, the One, the Victorious. But do thou send Sahim back to the city of Oman, so happily he may be healed of his ailment.' For Sahim was sick. So Mura'ash cried to the Marids, saying, 'Take ye up Sahim and these treasures, and bear them to Oman city.' And after replying, 'We hear and we obey,' they took them and made for the land of men. Then Mura'ash wrote letters to all his governors and captains of fortresses, and they came to him with 160,000 warriors. So they made them ready and departed for the city of Carnelian and the castle of gold, whereupon they encamped and passed the night. Next morning, as they were about to set forth, behold, the vanguard of Barkan's army appeared, whereupon the Jinn cried out, and the 2 hosts met, and fell each other upon in that valley. Then the engagement was dight, And there befell a sore fight, as though an earthquake shook the sight, and fair plight waxed foul plight. Earnest came, and jest took flight, and parley ceased twixt wight and wit, whilst long lives were cut short in a trice, and the unbelievers fell into disgrace and despite. For Gharib charged them, proclaiming the unity of the worshipful, the all-might, and sore through necks, and left heads rolling in the dust. Nor did night betide before night 70,000 of the miscreants were slain, and the Moslemized over 10,000 Marids had fallen. Then the kettle drums beat their retreat, and the two hosts drew apart. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 657th night, she resumed, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the two hosts drew apart, Gharib and Mura'ash returned to their tents. After wiping their weapons and supper being set before them, they ate and gave each other joy of their safety, and the loss of their Marids being so small. As for Barkan, he returned to his tent, grieving for the slaughter of his champions, and said to his officers, O folk, an we tarry here and do battle with them on this wise, in 3 days we shall be cut off from the last wight. Quoth they, And how shall we do, O king? Quoth Barkan, We will fall upon them under cover of night, whilst they are deep in sleep, and not one of them shall be left to tell the tale. So take your arms, and when I give the word of command, attack and fall on your enemies as one. Now there was amongst them a Marid named Jann, whose heart inclined to al-Islam. So when he heard the Kafir's plot, he stole away from them, and going in to King Mura'ash and King Gharib, told the twain what Barkan had devised. Whereupon Mura'ash turned to Gharib and said to him, O my brother, what shall we do? Gharib replied, Tonight we will fall upon the miscreants, and chase them into the wilds and the wolds, and if it be the will of the omnipotent king. Then he summoned the captains of the Jann, and said to them, Arm yourselves, you and yours, and as soon as 'tis dark, steal out of your tents on foot, hundreds after hundreds, and lie in ambush among the mountains. When you see the enemy engaged among the tents, do ye fall upon them from all quarters. Hearten your hearts, and rely on your Lord, and ye shall certainly conquer. And behold, I am with you. So as soon as it was dark night, the infidels attacked the camp, invoking aid of fire and light. But when they came among the tents, the Moslems fell upon them, calling for help of the Lord of the worlds, and saying, O most merciful of mercifuls, O creator of all created, till they left them with mown grass, cut down and dead. Nor did morning dawn before the most part of the unbelievers were species without souls, and the rest made for the wastes and marshes, whilst Gharib and Mura'ash returned triumphant and victorious, and making prize of the enemy's baggage, they rested till the morrow, when they set out for the city of Carnelian and the castle of gold. As for Barkan, when the battle had turned against him, and most of his lieges were slain, he fled through the dark with the remnant of his power to his capital, where he entered his palace, and assembling his legionaries said to them, O folk, whoso hath aught of price, let him take it, and follow me to the mountain Kaf, to the blue king, lord of the pied place, for he is who shall avenge us. So they took their women and their children and their goods, and made for the Caucasus mountains. Presently Mura'ash and Gharib arrived at the city of Carnelian and castle of gold, to find the gates open, and none left to give them news. Whereupon they entered the Mura'ash, and led Gharib that he might show him the city, whose walls were builded of emeralds, and its gates of red carnelian, with studs of silver, and the terrace roofs of its houses and mansions reposed upon beams of lign aloes and sandalwood. So they took their pleasure in its streets and alleys, till they came to the palace of gold, and entering passed through 7 vestibules, when they drew near to a building whose walls were of royal balass rubies, and its pavements of emerald jacinth. The two kings were astounded at the goodliness of the place, and fared on from vestibule to vestibule, till they had passed through the 7th, and happened upon the inner court of the palace, wherein they saw 4 daïses, each different from the other, and in the midst a jetting fountain of red gold, compassed with golden lions, from whose mouth issued water. These were things to daze man's wits. The estrade at the upper end was hung and carpeted with brocaded silks of various colors, and thereupon stood 2 thrones of red gold, inlaid with pearls and jewels. So Mura'ash and Gharib sat down on Barkan's thrones, and held high state in the palace of gold. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease my telling of the tales for today, till it be morrow.